to have 2 universities that are properly signed up to a civic university agreement. I suppose the things I'd say in terms of jobs are about the importance of really clear economic strategy for places like ours. So the Northern Growth work that was announced just at the beginning of the year, critical for us in terms of retention of graduates. At the moment, you could live in Sheffield and not be able to travel to work in Leeds, which is 30 miles away because the trains are so terrible. So that is a really, engagement in those sorts of big policy points are really critical, as well as engagement with students when they are in places. So we often see that student engagement is very, very high in smaller institutions where they feel a real sense of belonging, but you can deliver and drive that sense of belonging if you work really closely, for example, with student unions. And then the final thing I'll just say is around recognising that that civic engagement from our students is really critical, and many of the students in University in Sheffield are from the region, and so do feel that sense of connection and belonging, want to be there more than just an education experience. They want to be part of a place, and I think sometimes we other students and universities and see them as the kind of classic ivory tower, when actually they should be a core part of the way our civic fabric works.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to draw this to a close. So much food for thought there. There isn't a break as such. We're just going to rearrange the desks a bit, and then Ruth's going to be introducing Andy Burnham for any ideas he's got on what could be done better for Unsung Britain. Thanks very much.
Nice to see you.
Do you mind shuffling? You might. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it's standing room only. There is some room around the side if people are a bit squashed. So I opened the conference this morning highlighting the disconnect between a Westminster full of gossip and the realities of families' lives across Britain. So just in case a few of you have tuned in to hear the Mayor of Greater Manchester but missed some of the earlier discussion today, I'm going to shamelessly spend a few minutes filling you in on some of the conclusions, because I know that's what you're really here for. And if I whet your appetite, there are hard copies of our research report, Unsung Britain, published today, available on your way out. So we've been looking at what's happened to the living standards of the 13 million working-age families in Britain who have below-average incomes. On average, they are working harder, with an 11 percentage point rise in the employment rate over the last 30 years, but without getting much more in return. In the 40 years before 2005, the incomes of this group doubled. At the trend that we've seen since then, it would take over 130 years for that to happen again. The difference between pre- and post-2005 is fully explained by a lack of pay growth, which in the long run is linked to economic productivity. Boosting the UK's dire productivity performance must be part of any living standards strategy. So looking beyond the averages, two things really stand out for me from the report and from the excellent discussions we've had today. Health. Rising ill health and disability is having a profound effect on the lives of lower income families in Britain. Ageing only explains 17% of the stark rise in disability rates. The burden of caring for an older and iller population is also falling disproportionately on lower income families. This has many and varied profound implications, and I thought we just had a fantastic discussion of that. But certainly one is that we need to have the sort of revolution in supporting people to combine work and care that we've seen over the last few decades in combining work and parenting. Second, housing. While it used to be fairly common for families on below average incomes to get on the property ladder with a mortgage, that has become a much more distant dream for many. It's now almost as common to be living with parents as it is to have a mortgage for the lower half of Britain. So with nearly 3 in 10 families facing the very high costs associated with renting from a private sector landlord, housing costs are a key cost of living issue. At the moment, the tax system compounds those costs with a regressive tax on property, council tax, and the benefit system does not compensate for those costs, with the amount benefits pay for housing costs frozen in cash terms. But we do also see, in the analysis published today, and I think in lots of the discussions, the power of government policy to make a difference. Whether that is the substantial rises in the minimum wage under the previous Conservative government or the removal of the limit on benefits for third and subsequent children under this government. The latter contributes to a much better outlook for living standards for poorer families in 2026 than we've seen in recent decades. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing how Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, thinks we can tackle some of these issues in the year ahead. Thank you for joining us, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to be here today to thank the Resolution Foundation for refocusing the British political debate on people who most need politics to work for them, people who face the biggest pressures day to day, the people who were still out at work during the pandemic when many of us were still at home. And the truth is, the focus hasn't been on them for far too long. And that's why I do credit the Resolution Foundation for bringing it. I would say the focus was lost 4 decades ago, when the approach became more individual and market-driven, when Westminster policy tended to be geared towards those who were more affluent and the most aspirational. So let me give you 3 examples of that, and this relates to my 16 years in Parliament and what I experienced. If you take housing policy, it was almost exclusively focused on home ownership. Renting, until recently, didn't get much of a look in. Transport policy was, again, very much focused on the motorist, and education policy focused on the university route. And I look back to my time in government and the setting of that 50% target in 1999 for university attendance. If it would have been justifiable if there was a corresponding ambition for the other 50% of young people, but there never was, and for that reason it was wrong and unforgivable to put that target there in the way that it was. It was Westminster, in my view, at its worst. The time when the country last had a full focus on Unsung Britain, I would say, was in the 40 or so years after the war, when a collective approach defined public policy in terms of repairing the basics, and it built the health, wealth, and life chances of working class Britain. If I think back to my own youth in the northwest of England, born in Liverpool, grew up in the Greater Manchester area, if I think of my own youth in the 1970s and my friends and the people I grew up with, I would say it was the combination of available council housing and good technical education which provided the foundations for working class aspiration. The breakup of those foundations in the 80s and 90s threw those aspirations into reverse, and obviously that was combined with deindustrialisation in the Midlands, in the North, and other parts of the country. And they've never recovered since. And then if you add to that the deregulation and privatisation of essential services in the same period, those privatisations represented a huge transfer of power away from Unsung Britain and towards, if you like, the better off half. And the poorer half were left exposed to much higher costs for life's essentials, rents, water bills, energy, rail fares, and bus fares. Following recent events, I think the time has come to call an end to this era in British politics, when politicians got too close to wealth, too seduced by the notion that deregulated markets would provide the solution, when in fact they have been the problem for those on the lowest incomes. And I can give you a direct example from Greater Manchester, because I have lived the experience of taking a deregulated bus system and putting it back under public control. In the 35 years after the old GM buses was broken up, routes were cut, fares soared, and passenger numbers halved. Is it surprising that that is the result when you hand the control of an essential service to vested interests? To retake public control of our buses, we had to fight those interests all the way to the High Court and pay millions of pounds for bus depots, which we were forced to give away for a song in the 1980s. And that stuck in the throat somewhat to have to do that. But we did it. And I would say in recent decades, Westminster politicians have not been prepared to do these things, these hard things. But if we are serious about solving the simultaneous housing and cost of living crises, then they will need to be so. Our aim as a country should be very explicit. Lower rents, lower water bills, lower energy bills, lower rail fares, lower bus fares. To improve the lives of Unsung Britain, the most important thing to fix is housing. It is fundamental. The Finnish have a philosophy of housing first, and I think we need to recapture that. We had it in that post-war era, but we've not had it for a long time. You can't have anything in life without a good, secure home. You can't have good health. Your kids can't have a good education. But as we sit here today, millions of our fellow citizens do not have a good, secure home. I was going to say the luxury. It shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a human right enshrined in UK law. Because with a good home, everything is possible. Without it, it must feel like nothing is. So we need to make the housing crisis preeminent in our thinking if we want to support Unsung Britain. The post-war government, as I said, understood that, and it is remarkable that so many of the homes it built, including the prefabs, are still lived in today. It shows if you want to do these things quickly, you can do these things quickly, and it's a matter of political will. And I would suggest 3 specific things. I think we should now, at this point in the life of the government, set a new preeminent target of building 500,000 council and social homes by the end of this decade. It is simply not possible to solve the housing crisis without it. And thank you to that one person at the back. Secondly, we should give powers and funding to councils to purchase compulsorily homes in the private rented sector which are non-decent. You should no longer get the right in this country to rent out a home with the help of the benefit system when the condition of that home harms the health of the residents within it and drags down the whole community around it. Now, that may sound quite a radical approach, but I think that is what is needed. Homes that were taken out of public ownership have been left in a state of disrepair, are, if you like, there to make money for an absent landlord, but everyone else around it pays the consequences. It should not be acceptable. We wouldn't allow a food product or something else to harm the health of people, but we somehow allow homes to be rented out that harm the health of our residents in Greater Manchester. Why? It should end. And thirdly, I would suggest accelerating a retrofit programme across the country to give millions of people better homes with permanently lower energy bills, even possibly freeing people completely from the worry about energy bills. I don't know if you saw the programme on Channel 4 last night, The House Without Bills. It is a possibility in the era in which we live. So I believe, with the right action, it is possible for Britain to free itself from the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis within a decade. But it will take a new era of more energetic, activist and interventionist government and a new culture in Whitehall and Westminster. To build this new economy, this is a crucial point, I also believe we must first create a new politics. And I say that having spent 16 years in Westminster, but have since had almost a decade now as Mayor of Greater Manchester, where we do live a place-first approach to politics. We take a long-term view of what Greater Manchester needs. We work in partnership across the parties and with our private sector, with our community and voluntary sector. And you can see the results when you implement a new political culture. You see what comes from it. I would say our national political system is too short-term, too focused on point scoring, and concentrates power in too few hands. Its inherent volatility creates uncertainty in markets. If we are to do the heavy lifting of repairing Britain's essentials, we will need to create this new political culture, one that is more collaborative, consensual, and long-term in its thinking. And I believe that requires electoral reform, number one, reform of the whip system to empower elected representatives over the executive, number two, and thirdly, a reform of the upper house that is riddled with conflicts of interest and speaks exactly to the wrong politics that I started with. When this country gave away control of the essentials, it left people, businesses, and the country exposed to higher costs that they and we couldn't control. It's hard to control public spending when you have no choice but to chase rents in the private rented sector through the benefits system. Putting these things right will require public investment to bring down public spending in the long run. The National Housing Federation commissioned research that found from building 90,000 council or social homes, the savings to the country would be £3.3 billion recurrent in universal credit. On that basis, the 500,000 homes that I said before I think we should build would save 18 billion. With a new politics, it should be possible to get a long-term agreement on the investment needed to realise these public spending savings. In a more collaborative political system, the markets would have greater confidence and certainty. And Britain needs to find a way of making these long-term public investments, retaking control of those essentials that are so harmful to Unsung Britain in terms of finding the way of paying for those essentials. And it needs to be done in a manageable way with minimum volatility. Hence, the need for root and branch reform in Westminster and Whitehall, and a new political culture and a new political system. To be clear about something, I have never said Britain should ignore the bond markets or even blame them. What I do say is that it is the decisions of politicians from the 1980s onwards that have left us in hock to them with little headroom and room for manoeuvre. It is only politicians who can take us out of that position with better choices. And what I mean by that is the right long-term investments backed by greater stability in a new political system. Far from ignoring the markets, that would make Britain a more investable proposition going forward. So, Ruth, I will close because I'm keen to get into everyone's questions, but I will finish by just saying this. For all of its challenges, I believe this government has in fact drawn a line and taken Britain into this new political era and shown the different thinking required to relieve Unsung Britain from the cost pressures it faces. For instance, the decision to renationalise rail is a prime example of that, and I think something the government should talk about more. Having frozen rail fares, we now need to start talking about lowering rail fares. That's the benefit that public control can bring, and I believe it's what we should be working towards together with the government. And also bring pace and focus to lowering the cost of other of life's essentials. To do that requires stability, and I make my own call for that today across the Labour Party. Of course, stability comes from greater unity, and that would be helped by a more inclusive way of running the party. But recent events makes that now feel possible. And from greater stability and unity, today our focus should be on the by-election in Manchester, which I am going to say to you all today is winnable for Labour. Why? Because GM Labour, Manchester Labour, has used public control of life's essentials, exactly as I've been saying to you today, to reduce the cost of living pressure on our residents. We have control of the fare box, so we have kept the £2 fare for the whole of 2026. Like here in London, it's a hopper fare, so people can catch 2 or 3 buses within the hour. In 3 weeks' time, we will remove the 9:30 restriction on older people's bus passes and disabled people's bus passes. We have introduced a new annual ticket through our credit unions, where people who can't afford the upfront cost of an annual can pay in weekly or monthly instalments through a credit union and thereby get the discount of an annual ticket. We are doing these things, and that means we have got an argument to take to people in Denton and Gorton about the change that we make when we build the collective wealth, the common good, and focus on that. And that is what we've done. But to do more, we now need to make that case to do more. And that means a politics of collectivism defeating the politics of division. A politics of division which seeks to pit people and communities against each other. Let me say to you, Greater Manchester's success is built on a complete rejection of that approach. And I appeal to people to reject it again on the 26th of February. We are the UK's fastest growing city region because we are built on collaboration. We are built on partnership. We are built on standing up for each other, right back to the cotton workers of 1862 who refused to handle slave-picked cotton. That is the Greater Manchester tradition that I am proud to carry forward. And we will fight for that tradition because it's the right way to do things. Thinking about the common good, everybody benefiting, everybody supporting each other. That's always been our way. And we will fight hard to make sure it is always our way. And we need to channel the spirit of those cotton workers right now in focusing on Unsung Britain, in building a new political culture to take us into a new era where we focus our power as politicians on the people who have least power, rather than using the power we have as politicians to give more power to those who already have the most. That politics is bankrupt. It needs to end now, and we need to refocus completely, in my view, on what I'm saying today, and carry this new era forward, putting right at the front of our priorities the underdogs of Britain, people who feel forgotten, and places that have been neglected. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm sure we've got lots of people who want to ask questions. Let me just ask you one. You've told us something really interesting there, I think, about your economic philosophy, about essentials being more in public control. You've also done a lot in Manchester to boost the productivity of Manchester. You mentioned some of the stats. Can you expand a bit more on where you see the public sector working and where you see the private sector working?
I mean, I say those things not out of a sort of what some would say, oh, kind of, you know, head in the clouds leftism. These things are the foundations of a more productive economy, a growing economy. You all know here in London, an integrated public transport system is the kind of the cornerstone of economic success, isn't it? People are able to get around easily and affordably. Well, large parts of Britain doesn't have that, and we're the first place outside of London to build that. And you can only integrate if you've got control. You can't link bus and tram and train together unless you've got oversight over the whole thing. And I think we need to challenge people on the right of politics who broke these things up to say, actually, you damaged our productivity as a country when you did that. And if you look at the housing situation, how much kind of sickness is linked to people's poor housing? And I'm not just talking about people's physical health. I think this is an issue more of mental health. How many people worry themselves to sleep every night in this country, thinking about the rent and whether they can actually make it all stack up? And what impact does that then have on their working life and their productivity the next day? We just haven't focused on these things. And if I remember, you know, my time in Westminster, they rarely got a look in. And as I say, it was often quite a glib thing about, oh, we'll promote home ownership for everybody, or, you know, we'll promote the car and the motorist. But actually, that wasn't the kind of bread and butter issues that the vast majority of people are wanting, you know, the fabric that supports people to just live and function every day. And it did take me leaving and coming out and sort of looking at things from the bottom up and inheriting that incredible Greater Manchester tradition that I spoke about, built by Sir Howard Bernstein, Sir Richard Lees. You know, that the success of our economy is linked to an approach which guarantees or seeks to guarantee the basics for people so that then they can be as productive employees as possible. So these two things are absolutely bound up together. Why has Britain got a low growth problem, and particularly one outside of the EU? It's because I think our membership of the EU masked some of these things. And finally, we kind of see it laid bare. You know, Britain is underpowered right across the country, across the English regions. And devolution finally is driving some pace and purpose and power back into the proud English regions. But, you know, we didn't spend a long time without it.
Great. Questions in the room. Luckily, I'm asking Rob and James to coordinate. James, do you want to take a few?
Thank you. Chris Smythe from the Financial Times. You praised some of what this government is doing, but it sounds like you're saying they really need to be an awful lot bolder if they are to solve some of these problems. So is your backing that you gave today conditional on that? And does your appeal for unity imply colleagues like Wes Streeting need to be a bit more subtle in their positioning?
I think this is a moment to, as I say, everybody face in the same direction and pull in the same direction around bolder ambitions for certain. And I have said today that I think housing needs to rise to that top of that list, but particularly council and social housing, because that in the end will realise day-to-day spending savings. So, you know, I'm not saying the government was wrong to set a 1.5 million target, but it depends on what homes you build as to whether or not achieving that would actually solve the housing crisis. If you build 500,000 council and social homes, you will put a massive dent in the housing crisis, possibly even release people from it. I know in Greater Manchester, and I think it's probably true across large parts of the country, that we are still losing more council and social homes than we are building every year. 2 of our councils are in surplus, and we have a new target to hit the tipping point of building more than we're losing by 2028. But until the grip of the housing crisis is not constantly getting tighter, I think all of the challenges of Unsung Britain are not going to be, quite frankly, not going to be solved. So no, it wasn't qualified or guarded. I praise the government. I think they have broken with the governments I was in that didn't allow people to re-regulate buses, that didn't renationalise the railways, that didn't have as ambitious plans around housing. So they've kind of come forward with the big ambitions. I think what we all need to do now is drive the pace of change more quickly, and that means greater unity across the whole of the Labour family, Labour movement, in terms of all parts of it pulling in the same direction. I think we are at a generational moment in politics, actually. I do feel that. I think recent events have kind of really drawn a heavy line under, you know, a political culture that was kind of too close to wealth and power and too distant from the lives of people that we're talking about today. So the government, in my view, should just now, in this moment, lean completely into that theme and work with devolved authorities like the one I lead. And on WhatsApps, I have no comment to make on that.
And I think you're completely right on housing, Andy. 1.5 million homes is both ambitious. It's more than we've kind of managed to sustainably build as a country since we had large public sector house building. But it's also, it doesn't move the dial on its own. It takes us back to something like 2021 levels of stock. So where they're built, what kind of homes they are is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I'm not saying completely, you know.
No, I get
but I think you could chase that and not actually, you could miss the point.
Exactly.
Because the point is you need to hugely expand the public housing stock, particularly if you want to get the benefits bill down. And I come back to the point I said, you know, we always approach the housing debate in terms of building new homes. Focus on those homes in the private rented sector that you'll know them, you'll see them in your community, you know, completely neglected, unloved, you know, terrible for the residents who live there. You know, why are we allowing that? You know, I would like to see the, if you like, the reinvigoration of local government. Give them more agency, give them more power, let them go out and solve things like that. Is there a kind of surprise that we live in an era of alienation from politics when people walk out of their front door and see a pothole or see an overgrown park and say to a councillor, can we do something about this? We can't, there's no... Yeah. I mean, national government's treatment of local government under all colours of government is frankly disgraceful. They have statutory responsibilities but are not funded to meet them. I think this is another part of repairing what's wrong in the country. You've got to start there and give councils the ability to improve the fabric of their communities, because then some trust is restored in the agency of politics to improve people's lives. You know, we shouldn't be surprised that people feel despair when simple things can't be fixed.
Right, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't get some more questions in at the front here.
Helia Ibrahimi, Channel 4 News. You said you wanted unity and stability. Does that mean Keir Starmer has your full support to stay on as Prime Minister? And then second to that, a lot of people feel that this government hasn't delivered for working class Britons. That's why they're angry. That's why Labour is tanking in the polls. How long does the government and Keir Starmer have to change that?
Yes, he has my support. The government has my support. And they had my support when I put myself forward for the by-election. Because, as I said at the end, I think you can't take it for granted that the politics that I'm speaking about gets to do what I'm saying today. You have to take on a politics that is seeking to do something very different and break up what has underpinned Greater Manchester's success. So I do feel we're at a crucial moment. It is absolutely right that people give the government stability in this moment. I don't agree with you that the government hasn't done anything to support, as you say, working class Britain. I reference things that we are doing with the government support in Greater Manchester. You know, we are one of the few areas to give our 16 to 18-year-olds a free bus pass, to give them all that high aspiration coming through secondary school. We are building a new integrated technical education system called the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, the MBAC, that is very much focused on the unsung kids, if you like, of Greater Manchester who've not had their education opportunities spoken up as much as those on the university route. And I've got the backing of the Education Secretary, who I was with yesterday, talking to about that. We could mention other things, breakfast clubs. So I think it's got to be... Well, it's a lot 2 years in, and I know people didn't necessarily applaud the freezing of rail fares, but it was an important move after years of relentless rises. So I think there should be more, though, and I think now it's about a relentless focus on these things and be explicit, I think, anyway, in lowering rents, water bills, energy bills, rail fares, bus fares. I said it in the speech. I'll say it again. I think we are paying far too much for these things compared to other countries in Europe, and that explains why some people really struggle to hold it all together month to month.
James, can you find me another question? Great, let's take both if that's all right.
No worries.
Hi, I'm Kate, I'm from Save the Children. I wanted to ask what structural barriers you think you're facing from Westminster to be able to do more to deliver for children, particularly children living in poverty? And secondly, will you come and visit our projects in Manchester?
Yes, that's a better question than what's happening. Absolutely, I would love to. And structural barriers. I still think there's a sort of a disconnect in the Whitehall machine around poverty. And it's great, obviously, the lifting of the two-child rule, and that will have a huge impact on kids in Greater Manchester. However, I see a homelessness strategy before Christmas, which was very good, but I also see the freezing of local housing allowance. I mentioned in the speech the government having to chase rents through the private rented sector, and it leads to them constantly freezing local housing allowance. But what does that do? That makes families homeless, because the gap between their income and their rent is too big. And today in Greater Manchester, there are around, you'll know these figures as well, I think 6,500 kids in temporary accommodation. I mean, that is shocking, isn't it, in this day and age in Britain. And across the country, I think it's over 100,000, isn't it? And it's those kind of things that we should be very focused. When I say fixing the housing crisis, priority number one should be to get those families out of temporary accommodation and do that quickly, because actually it doesn't work for anybody, because the councils have to pay for that temporary accommodation and they don't get a budget. They have to find that somehow as an unfunded pressure. So it's why I say national government really doesn't focus enough on local government and what its decisions do to local government, and particularly what those decisions mean for child poverty in places like Greater Manchester. And I think we need a join up of all of those things. And you can only, if you want to stop chasing rents in the private rented sector, build more council homes, take more homes back out of the private rented sector into the public stock. That's what we're trying to do in Greater Manchester, but we would want to move much faster than we are able to.
Should we take the question that we promised? Thanks.
Thanks for that. Joe Wright, Tax Justice UK. You rightly talked a lot about the problems with housing and housing inequality, particularly in the private sector. Landlords pay less tax than their tenants do because they don't pay national insurance contributions, and that's clearly unfair to most people. So would you support landlords paying the same tax as their residents?
Without having all the detail in front of me, I think there would be an argument for that as part of a much greater reform of the whole private rented sector. I do think we just need to focus on this crucial question of housing standards and rents, and not allowing a situation to persist where you have thousands of homes in Greater Manchester, some say even up to 30% of our private rented stock being beneath the decent homes standard. How have we just allowed that to kind of happen? It's not acceptable. And maybe those tax measures could be enforced to give incentives to raise those housing standards.
Great. Last question. Rob, your choice.
Thank you so much. Alex Forsyth, BBC News. You have repeatedly called for stability. You have called for unity. Do you therefore think it was wrong of Anna Sarwar to call for the Prime Minister to resign? Do you think this government is capable of delivering the policy changes that you are advocating? And can you yourself rule out any future challenge to Keir Starmer's leadership?
What I am calling for very clearly today is for the unity, to create the stability, to give the government the platform to focus on all of the things that I'm talking about today. And, you know, I think we've got to get away from the kind of sense that everything is a challenge. You know, I put myself forward, but I was saying I spoke to the Prime Minister, spoke to the government, you know, we need to get a strong sense of a stronger team again than there has been in recent times, and that I think is what needs to come from this. We need to sort of dial down all of this constant briefing. You know, it's seemingly a bit endless. Some of the anonymous briefing that's going around. I think we just need to, you know, focus on what's in front of us. There's a by-election in front of us. I've been playing my role in that by-election. It's been over a number of times. You know, that is actually that's the issue in politics right in front of us. The politics of collectivism versus the politics of division, and it's that stark. And my view is you've got to focus on stopping that now. I do not want that politics to get any toehold or foothold in Greater Manchester. And honestly, I'm here today to speak about that and focus on that, because that is the challenge in front of us right now, and everything else is noise in the background. Let's be proud of what this government has already done, and it has done many good things. I am very proud of what Greater Manchester has done to improve the lives of people in Gorton and Denton, and there are real tangible things that we can point to. You often go to a by-election and people say, oh, not done anything round here, there's no difference. Well, they can't say that because we've made a big change in terms of public transport. And that's, I think, where everyone has to focus. And that's my message today. And I think we all need to move forward in that spirit from here.
Thank you, Andy. And I think that very much chimes with what we wanted to do with today's report and today's conference, which is to focus exactly as you say on the people in the country who don't have as much political voice, who don't have the resources to fight for that voice, and who have had a very poor experience over the last 2 decades. It's been wonderful to hear some very practical ideas through our panels to add to the recommendations in our report as to what could have been done. It was wonderful, Andy, to have such a thoughtful speech from you about how these issues could really be addressed with more boldness.
I was just going to make one final point, if I may. Sorry, I know you were wrapping up.
That's all right.
But,
I was told I had to finish on time, Andy, but I've got as much time as you like.
I just wanted to say something finally. It was an anecdote I was going to mention, and I forgot to in my speech, but I will share it with you because it does sort of speak to everything that today is about. I can see Lord Willits with us today. He'll remember the late but very great Paul Goggins, who was a member of Parliament when we were both in the House. And Paul was the MP for Wythenshawe and Sale East, if you remember him. He was my mentor when I arrived in 2001. Paul, for those of you who knew him or anything of him, was just dedicated to the underdog. You know, he'd always be raising issues related to the treatment of prisoners or, you know, families in the position that we were talking about before. That was Paul. When I came into Parliament, I remember he said something to me very early on that I've never forgotten. He said, the point of being here, Andy, is you've got power and you should use all of it, every bit of it, for people who have little power or none at all. But what you will find is most people in here are using their power for people who've already got too much. And the truth of what he said became more and more apparent to me during my time in Parliament. And I do just finish on that, and I just encourage you to think about that and from what you observe in politics. I think we've had a political culture that hasn't served the common good for quite a while. And I'm not making this a right and left thing. It's been there in all parties. And it hasn't served the interests of unsung Britain. And I just think Britain needs to really refocus in this moment. It is a generational moment. If we're not going to rethink things now, then when are we going to do it? And I do come back to it. We have to rethink the whole way of working of politics. The power in too few hands in Whitehall and Westminster creates that situation where the manipulation of power by vested interests works against the common good. And we've just, in my view anyway, I'm giving you my experience, I have seen that far too much in my political life. And I believe strongly now we need electoral reform, political reform, the replacement of the House of Lords with an elected Senate of the nations and regions. We need root and branch reform across Whitehall and Westminster. And it's only by a new politics will we start to build a new economy. I don't think you can do one without the other.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Andy Burnham for joining us today. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to you for coming. And final thanks to the Resolution Foundation team, and particular to Alessia Jones, who has organised today's conference so fabulously. Please do feel free to stay for a little bit and mill around. It's a fantastic group of people, but thank you very much for joining us.